And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that folks know what we're doing. And all right. So thanks for joining us. This is really just pretty informal. It's an Ask Me Anything. I went to Mizzou. Michelle did not. We're going to tell you a little bit more about ourselves. We're just going to self-introduce. I'm Doris Truong. I'm the Director of Training and Diversity at the Poynter Institute, which is based in St. Petersburg, Florida. And I'm not actually in our lovely atrium, but that is what it looks like. And it is very warm here today, 85 degrees, kind of muggy. I am a Mizzou grad, and I'm going to actually let Michelle introduce herself. She just moved to St. Louis.
Thank you so much, Doris. Okay, so I'm embarrassed because I grew up in Missouri. I'm currently about to start a new job in Missouri, but I did not go to Mizzou. And I will just say it's only because, I know, but I went to the University of Kansas, but I will say it's because I had a scholarship that made it cheaper for me to go to Kansas. So I feel like that was a good reason. But I've literally have, like my two very best professors were from Mizzou, and also my whole family went to Mizzou. So, you know, I eat crow a lot. But I just moved from Seattle. I worked at King 5 in Seattle, and I was a morning anchor and reporter. And now I'm in St. Louis, getting ready to start my job at KSDK next week. And been a journalist for about 19 years now. So doing, I should say, reporting, anchoring, editing, shooting, all that jazz. So just about anything that you can do in a newsroom, I think I've done it, at least in a broadcast setting.
Yeah, so I love that Michelle's here today, because I think you're going to get a pretty good cross-section of professional journalism from both of us. Because Michelle, do you have a question? You raised your hand. Because I have worked in legacy print, and I've also worked on the digital side of things, and I have a pretty good understanding of broadcast because of some projects that I'm working on right now through Poynter. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing just so that I can keep an eye on what's happening in the Whova app in case there are questions there. I do know that somebody submitted a question early. I don't know if that person is here. There was a question from Emma Hillerman. Did Mizzou set you up for a career so you can go straight into the field? And I will say absolutely Mizzou did, but I will also give you the caveat that I went to Mizzou more than 20 years ago. So I'm sure the program is even better these days. But I do think that one of the things that had set Mizzou apart at the time that I went there was we were learning things at the time when we would think, why are we learning to draw pages by hand for the front page of the newspaper? Why are we having to literally use pencil and paper to do this? You don't actually have to do this in the world. There are computers. And it turns out that that actually set us up to work for any number of newsrooms, because not every newsroom was as well as equipped as even the Columbia Missourian. All right, so we've got a question from Raven. Is it hard to get a job in journalism? Michelle, what do you think?
I don't think it is anymore. I think it used to be a lot harder. I mean, oh gosh, now let me go back. Can it be hard? Yes, it can be hard, depending on where you want to live, depending on what you want to do, depending on your life experience. All those things can make it challenging, but it's not hard to be a journalist. First of all, I would say that everyone in this Zoom call could be a journalist or is a journalist now. It's the act of gathering information and telling the truth and seeking the truth. But if you want a job, let's say in Seattle, it might take you a few years to get to Seattle. For me, it took me 15 years, but I'm a late bloomer. Not everyone's going to take that long. You know, typically, if you go on the broadcast side, you would start somewhere maybe like in Joplin or St. Joe, and then, or Columbia, and then perhaps go to Springfield, Missouri, which is where I worked for 8 years. And then went to Madison, Wisconsin, and Wilmington, North Carolina, and ended up in Seattle. So it kind of depends on what you want to do to get you to those certain points, certain places.
Yeah, and I don't know what is available to you all in your schools. I would imagine because you're part of this J-Day, perhaps there are already some outlets that you have at school, which is great. That's actually how I got my start in journalism, was working on my high school newspaper. And my advisor there was the person who really encouraged me to apply to Mizzou, which is a school I'd never even heard of. I grew up in Colorado. And because I was never initially all that interested in journalism, which has become my career, I didn't really think about what schools I would want to go to. And, Mizzou definitely set me up, but there's lots of great things that you can do as a journalist without having to go to a J school, and you can get started anytime. Like, that's the great thing about this industry. It's really democratic, especially as you look at all the technology that's available now. Like, there are people who are on TikTok who are breaking news, which is pretty awesome. So Aurora's question, what's the most common jobs you apply to after college? What are the best credentials that can help you find a job? Well, I mean, there's lots of different opportunities. I do think it's important for you to start getting those experiences now in high school, if possible, and then really try and get as many internships and build your portfolio throughout college, because that's going to set you up to have the biggest possibilities as you get out there. Michelle, what do you think? What are some of the common jobs people apply to?
Well, I was thinking it depends. So for broadcast, I would always say apply for the job that you want. You're not going to be able to walk in and get the main anchor job, for example, but if you want to be on air, apply for a job on air, because otherwise you might say, oh, well, I'll do whatever it takes to get into a newsroom and I'll apply to be a producer. And then you might be in that role for an indefinite amount of time and not be happy about it. Granted, I will say there's so much need for people to have diverse skills that you could easily do on air and not on air. But I always think that the best situation is to apply for the job that you want. And then be flexible. Like I'll be on air. That's the job I'm going to apply for, but I'll still shoot. I'll still edit. I'll still write, all these things that are really the foundations of journalism anyway. Mm-hmm. And I do agree with Doris to get internships. I had 2. Granted, I wish I would have maybe thought bigger. I never allowed myself to dream bigger. Like I never allowed myself to think like I could get an internship at NBC. Instead I was like, I'm going to do the ABC affiliate in my hometown, and that was great because I got to do Kansas City, which is market in like a top 30 market. And then I also had an internship in Topeka, Kansas, which is a smaller market. So it was great because in Topeka, I could really get my hands dirty. They let me go out and shoot stories, and they took the time to let me shoot stand-ups, and I could write copy that would air on the shows. In Kansas City, I worked overnights, and I would try to, write a couple of short stories for the morning show. But that was because I worked overnights. Most daytime interns at that level were opening anchor mail, and shadowing reporters, which there's nothing wrong with that either. But depends on, I guess, how dirty you want to get your hands when you're in your internship.
Yeah, there are lots of great things that that Michelle just mentioned. I do agree with the advice of you want to apply for the job that you would like to have. But I think that one of the things that is not as well understood, especially until you get into the industry, is there are a lot of different kinds of journalism jobs. There's a lot more different kinds of jobs that exist now that didn't exist back when Michelle and I went to school, of course. But I think a misconception might be, oh, you're going to be a reporter because people expect that you're going to have a byline, but you might not realize how many other kinds of people are working along this like assembly line to make sure that the content gets out to the audience. And so I was a copy editor for many years, which isn't even really a title that truly exists a lot anymore. People are often referred to as multi-platform editors because they want people who can edit breaking news quickly for digital platforms first, because of course the newspaper takes many hours to put together and really is just your last pass at that copy. But the copy editor is not just somebody who is checking for commas or random typos. Like a lot of it is fact checking. A lot of it is also making sure that that content is the most understandable to the audience. That's something where they talk about you being the last line of defense, the reader's advocate. So that's something that until I started really getting into the nitty gritty of doing journalism work, I didn't know that existed. In radio, for instance, you might want to be a sound engineer. There are lots of different things you can do. You can do social media editing. You could be a data researcher. You can do graphics if you are really great with data. So there's lots of different kinds of journalism. And then Aurora had also asked, what are the best credentials that can help you find that job? I think that goes back to having a portfolio of content that you can point to, work that you've done, work that other people put on their platforms, because of course there are many ways you can self-publish, but think about all the self-published authors that you have read. Not that many, I bet. You're getting people who are on like Simon & Schuster or whatever. And I did put a link in the chat. I'm not sure if you can all access this. And for the people in the recording, I'm gonna see if I can upload a copy of a PowerPoint that will have some clickable links for you. But there are some internships on the Poynter database. Poynter is POYNTER.org. And we have a journalism database, journalism internship database. And what I love about that is that we promote only paid internships. So do not ever take an unpaid internship. Sometimes people will say this is an internship that's good for credit. That's even worse than an unpaid internship because you got to pay for those credit hours. So make sure you get paid in real money for the work that you're putting in as an intern. Raven already asked a question, so we'll come back to you. We've got a question from Zeke. Would awards won from either the, I don't know if you call it MIPA or MIPA, or other journalism contests be good to put on forms when applying for college? Absolutely. Yeah, just being, I think, a member of this association is something valid to put on there because it shows that you were interested in journalism starting very early. Absolutely. And you might be involved in Quill and Scroll or some other organizations like that. You might be involved in some journalism associations now, some professional journalism associations. I'm going to put up some slides toward the end of our time together to give you some more overview. And so let's go to Raven's question. What are some tips for learning spelling and grammar? Ah, okay. Well, I can point to some courses that poynter.org offers. I can send you some of those separately. But I think some of that is going to be, you're going to have to work on your own and figure out what are some of the things that work best for you. So things that work for other people may or may not work for you. There are lots of different tips. And of course, there's a lot of different technology that might be able to help you now. So I think a big part of it is figuring out what are some of the stumbling blocks to your own knowledge base. Like for a long time, I had to write down some of the rules that I was constantly looking up. I just had to make my own cheat sheet so that I would always have a short list. Grammarly, that's a great.
Yeah, I actually use Grammarly a lot now.
Mm.
You know what, another thing, Doris, just to add to that, first of all, it's great to spell everything correctly and use the proper grammar. In television, you're a little bit, I don't know if I can use the right, I'm trying to find the right words. Basically, because you are a visual medium, you don't necessarily have to worry about spelling and grammar. And you can always make the argument that you are speaking conversationally. So that is important in a medium like television. That being said, your web copy has to be correct. So I do think that there is some forgiveness in depending on what platform you're using, what medium you're in, and what the situation is. There are a lot of TV people who can't spell. Is basically what I'm trying to say.
There are lots of people throughout the industry who can't spell. What I find is that photographers in particular, photojournalists are very, very good at spelling most of the time because they have got to get those names correct. Because if they get it wrong, if somebody who works for the Associated Press, which is a major wire service that provides content for news organizations around the world, if they get it wrong, it's just going to be amplified by every organization that picks up that content. So they don't just double check something, they will triple and quadruple check it. Other questions?
These are really good questions.
Raven says that they do photography but can't spell. Well, it's good to know that there's that thing that you've got to work on, that you've got to make sure that you make sure that you spell correctly. So sometimes I've seen people say it out loud to themselves, like even like record a voice memo, then look back at what they typed in and make sure that it's correct. So Michelle, I think you and I have both kind of had semi-wide ranging careers. I think you've worked more places than I have, but tell me a little bit about your first job. How did you get that first job and what did you decide to do? Like what made you know that it was time to move on from that?
Okay, well, it's really interesting. So I told you that one of my favorite professors was a Mizzou grad, and he told me to get in my car after graduation and go around the country and back then we'd send VHS tapes. So, we would send tapes and we would say, hey, I'm going to be in your town. Do you think you would have time to meet with me, to all these news directors? And so usually they would say, no, we don't have time. We're really busy. And I said, yeah, but I'm already here, which I was a lie because I wasn't. So stand for truth when you're a journalist. But I would be like, no, I'm just coming into town. So we took a road trip. We went from, at the time, Lawrence, Kansas to Joplin, Fort Smith, Arkansas, Lake Charles, Louisiana, over to Biloxi, Mississippi, Savannah, Georgia, and Wilmington, North Carolina. And that was the first news director who said, if you can do a story, a package for me today, then I will hire you. And so that was a real test. Like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to write this story. And this is back, of course, I went in there. I didn't get paid for my story that I did that day. I wrote it and he approved it. He liked it. And he said, okay, I'm going to hire you. And so then you do a contract negotiation, and I moved out there a couple weeks later and started working. And when you're new in the business and you're in smaller markets, you might sign maybe a 1 or 2 year contract. And so I signed, I think, a 1 year contract. But news is very interesting. So as soon as I got hired and moved out there, my news director got fired. So they forgot to make me sign my contract. So, which is fine, because basically that just meant that I was a free agent. And within the first 7 months of my job, my friend said, hey, there's a job opening in Springfield, Missouri. Would you like to apply? And so I said, heck yeah, I can be close to my family. Yes. So I applied and I got that job. And that's how I knew. I just knew that I wanted to be closer to my family at the time, and got the job and moved home-ish. Springfield's not really my home, but got to be in my home state. And then I stayed in Springfield, Missouri for 8 years, and I felt like my career wasn't going the way I wanted it to. I wanted to anchor more, report less, just because I liked some of the longevity factors with that situation, and those job responsibilities. So in order for me to do that, I had to go back to a market that was smaller to anchor full time. And so then I kind of reset there. But I just knew that it was time, because I wanted more out of my career, or wanted something different out of my career, I should say, not more.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that what's really interesting about that is the realization that you wanted to have something that wasn't necessarily going into the next big market. I think that's also a misconception that people might have. Michelle knows our friend Renee Chu, who is a longtime anchor at WRAL in Raleigh. And Renee is somebody that I went to Mizzou with. But Renee also realized pretty early in her career, maybe 4 or 5 years into being a professional broadcaster, that she really liked kind of a mid-sized market. That I'm sure if Renee wanted to be, an anchor in New York, or is that the biggest market? I don't know, whatever the biggest market is. I'm sure if she wanted to do that, if she wanted to be national, she could be. But she also realized pretty early in life that she likes having that mix of being able to go to community events, being able to also have that downtime, not having to constantly be worrying about how do you be like the number one person in that market. And so I think that, if you want to be the number one person at the biggest market, that's great. You should do that. But you don't have to think that that's the only thing that is success. So a question about the hardest or biggest job we ever applied for, and how did we prepare? Well, so the thing is, even though I've had a kind of a career where I've done a lot of different things, I've only worked in 3 places. I did have an internship that I got through the Dow Jones News Fund, that Mizzou does do a good job of preparing you for that, because there's a real-time examination that Mizzou proctors, and then Dow Jones chooses its interns. And then I was assigned to work at the Richmond Times-Dispatch as an intern. But when I was interviewing for jobs, before I came out of college, I interviewed a bunch of different places. I was a finalist at the St. Pete Times, now the Tampa Bay Times. And so ironically did not end up taking that job. I took a job at the Dallas Morning News, which was a much, much bigger market. And it's, I'm not sure where it ranks now in terms of overall market share, because a lot of the things that people do in terms of determining how big a publication is are a little bit different. It used to be based only on your circulation size. But Dallas was a huge, huge step for somebody who was just fresh out of college. And I think it was actually, in retrospect, probably not the right move for me, because it was such a big market that any mistake that I made was really amplified. And so I made some big mistakes that caused corrections to be printed, which is a big deal, and really had to learn very quickly how to stop making those mistakes. And I think that of course I would have still made those same mistakes in a smaller market, but it wouldn't have been as big a deal because not as many people would have noticed it. So in that sense, it was a hard job. And then when I was looking to move, I was interviewing at the Washington Post, and they don't do this anymore. But when I was interviewing at the Washington Post in 2002, they would bring you in for a week-long tryout, which they did pay you for, which was pretty cool. But before I even got there, I spent months and months preparing, knowing that I was going to go there. Well, months is probably not accurate. I spent at least weeks preparing, reading all of the Washington Post from cover to cover, writing down all the different things that they did, knowing all of their current events, so that when I got there, that I'd be as successful as possible in that tryout. So it was a thing where I really had to know the market that I was going into. Whereas,
did you get the job?
I did, yes. So the thing is, you've got to be prepared anytime you go in for a job. And I think that's easier now, especially with Google and various things that you can learn online. You might also be able to tap someone in your network who might either know that organization or have worked there. But like way back in the day when I first interviewed at the Dallas Morning News and did get the job there, they had asked, there was what was it? It was just a question of basic facts about the Dallas area. And I didn't know them because I didn't bother to study. But one of the questions was, it just said Irving. And I said, oh, city where Dallas-Fort Worth Airport is, which is correct. But they were looking for me to say home of the Dallas Cowboys. So if I'd studied a little bit more, I would have known that that's what they were looking for. I still managed to get the job anyway, but looking back on it, there were many reasons that they shouldn't have hired me. Michelle, you're laughing. Do you have an experience about hard jobs or biggest jobs, and how did you prepare?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I was just thinking of a few interviews I bombed, because I didn't study.
Mm-hmm.
And you learn right away, I got to study for this, so it's, and I think the hardest one that I probably had was Seattle, just because Seattle this was a king, because it's a world-class city. You've got Amazon, you've got Microsoft, you've got the biggest and some of the most influential companies in the world in Seattle. So you really have to know, the political scene, who's the mayor, who are some of the controversial city council folks, and what are the big issues. Those are things that I think are really important. They don't give tests at the Seattle level anymore, but you do have to bring it up in conversation. They are testing you constantly. And for me, it was a 6-month process. So it wasn't necessarily a formal 6-month process, but we had been in contact for about 6 months before they officially flew me out. And then it was another few weeks before they made the offer. But I was just thinking when you were saying that, I was like, oh man, it takes me back, gives me anxiety, takes me back to ones that I've actually bombed, like just walked out like, oh, they're not going to hire me.
Yeah, that reminds me, actually, I do know of another test that is still active and operative, which is at CNN. And the person who's behind that is Ramon Escobar, who is a Mizzou grad. And Ramon is just a Supreme Court nerd. He'll tell you that himself. And he will put on the quiz list, and it's a quiz that has many questions. And what he's asking for is basically an 18-part answer to one of 10 questions. And the 18 parts that you got to get correct or pretty close to are, who are the 9 Supreme Court justices and which president nominated each justice? Which, hey, I know the justices, but I'd have to think pretty hard to get the president responsible for putting them into the Senate confirmation hearings.
They came to CNN, held a workshop for all of the Seattle journalists, and basically all of us failed. It was so embarrassing. It was so embarrassing.
Super hard. It takes you 5 minutes to answer those 18 parts. I don't know what Ramon thinks he's doing. Anyway, so Raven wants to know if we have to be mean to get information as journalists. Michelle's shaking her head. That's absolutely correct.
I mean, you've had to be mean before. I've had to be mean before. Not mean, but tough, right? But not mean. I think you attract more people what is it? You attract more flies, or is it flies with honey?
Flies with me. I don't know why you want to attract flies, but yes.
I mean, you're not. I just always try to stay true to myself and true to the story and keep the viewers in mind. So I'm not bees with honey. There you go. I'm not trying to persuade anyone by being fake. You always just want to be nice. You want to be to the point, but ultimately you're working for the viewer and you're working for the truth. But I have had to be stern with people, especially government officials who should be held accountable because they are supported by tax support. That you have to say, no, this is your job. You need to have a response to this, and you owe it to the public to be honest. So in that way, yes, I mean, that could be seen as mean, but I don't think it is when you look at the intent.
Right. And I do think that there is a growing movement in journalism where journalists are really thinking about not only preserving our humanity, but preserving the humanity of our sources, especially people who are not prepared to have the attention on them, which most sources aren't. A government official, they signed up for that job. But if you're talking to somebody after a tragedy, maybe this is definitely not one of their highlights of their life. Maybe if this is a really tough time for them, you need to not use them as a source. You, as a responsible journalist, have to make that decision for them. And that might make your editors upset, but there are other ways to tell the story. So you should definitely put the humanity of yourself and your sources at the top and really think about how you'd want sources to be treated if they were somebody that you knew. And I'm sure Michelle's also been on the other side of this. Whenever we've been interviewed, that's when you see, oh, there's various things that weren't correct here. And so you've got to really make sure you make things correct as a journalist also, because people do notice when you get the smallest things wrong. We are running a little short on time. I wanted to make sure I just show you a few more resources just so you have them, and then feel free to keep throwing questions at us. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I want to make sure you all know about all the different kinds of journalism associations that are out there, in addition to what you're already experiencing through your group, the interscholastic group. So there are some member associations that you can think about. And they all have student memberships, and I think they might even have hardship memberships if you would like to join and you need some financial assistance. Do not hesitate to ask. So SPJ, the Society for Professional Journalists, ONA, which is the Online News Association, really huge organization. They're planning an all virtual conference this summer. RTDNA, which is the Radio, Television, Digital News Association. NPPA, which is the National Press Photographers Association, and IRE, which is the Investigative Reporters and Editors. And so that's particularly great if you want to do like watchdog journalism, if you're really into data journalism. So IRE is an excellent group. And then some groups that are really close to top of mind for Michelle and me, they promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm going to throw all of these up at once. I often refer to these as the alphabet soup of organizations, but they're great. AAJA, which Michelle and I met through, it's the Asian American Journalists Association, and I am the former president of AAJA, which is actually how I got to meet Michelle. I was on a all chapter tour. I did a worldwide tour of the AAJA chapters and met Michelle in North Carolina. NABJ, which is the Black Journalists Association, NAHJ, which is the Hispanic Journalists, and NAJA, the Native American Journalists Association, which is thinking about changing its name to be more worldwide and inclusive and may become the Indigenous Journalists Association. And then a few more just to keep in mind. JAWS, which is for journalism, for women in journalism, NLGJA, which is for LGBTQ folks, and then the Transgender Association, which is pretty new. It's about a year old. And all of these organizations welcome you no matter whether you self-identify with that organization's main focus or not. You would just want to be committed to the mission of being inclusive and equitable and building newsrooms that promote diversity and inclusion. So those things. And then because I'm here on behalf of Pointer, I wanted to make sure you knew about the internship database, which I threw into the chat earlier. We only list paid roles. Again, super important to get paid for your work. We've got a high school journalism program, which maybe you already knew about, and it's going to be happening this summer. It's virtual, and I'm going to just play you a short clip from one of last year's participants. Oops, I forgot to embed that video, I think. Oh, no, here it is.
Hi, I'm Lily Watts, and I'm from St. Petersburg, Florida. I got new skills on how to improve my writing and practices that I can implement into my future.
Sorry, let me start this over. I screwed this up.
Journalists, and I got. Hi, I'm Lily Watts, and I'm from St. Petersburg, Florida. Today was the last day of the Poynter Institute's 2-week journalism program, and I sure learned a lot. I got new skills on how to improve my writing and practices that I can implement into my future writing. I got brief looks into the lives of real journalists, and I got to listen to my peers' personal stories. Joining this program will help you dive deeper into the world of journalism and help you decipher the facts from fiction in current media.
So we hope that you'll consider applying for that. We have scholarships available. And then just one other quick thing that I'm super excited about. It's a newsletter that launches next month, and it's called The Collective. It's a newsletter that's by journalists of color, that's for journalists of color, but we also want our allies to be involved as well. And I think our target audience is really Gen Z and millennials. And the objective would be for people who have already been there and experienced the challenges of newsrooms to be able to share our lessons and to be able to help anybody who's coming up behind us. And we also have an anonymous question portion of that. So you're welcome to send in your questions to our Council of Truth Tellers. So I'll stop sharing here. Other questions I did answer, I think. What's DEI? That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. You might sometimes just hear D&I, which is diversity and inclusion. You might hear IDEA. These are all similar things, but really the goal is to be as inclusive and equitable as possible. That's one of the reasons why my pronouns are listed with my name. And I encourage you to do the same. Today, I think, is actually some sort of transgender representation day. I'm gonna say it wrong because I don't remember exactly, but it's a day in which we want to be allies for people who are transgender. Other questions? You've got Michelle and me for another 11 minutes or so.
What really good questions. Oh, I raised my hand again. I'm sorry. I keep doing that.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I really enjoy journalism and I've been doing it for all 3 years of my time at high school, but I don't want to go into like a full career in it, is there any way that I can still like be a part of it?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's lots of ways that you can freelance. There are freelancing journalism associations that you can join if you want to try and figure out how you freelance. Like it's complicated being a freelancer. You probably do want to have some other full-time paying job if and not just rely on trying to freelance straight out of college to pay for your bills. But you want to figure out what it is that you want to do. Do you want to shoot video? Do you want to do everything? Like, do you want to come to somebody and say, I can do it all. I can do the full package for you. I can go out and report. I can get the video. I can edit the sound. I can write. I can produce all the social media. Like, you probably want to choose something that you feel super passionate about and try to be an expert on that, especially as you're getting started. But it sounds like you already have a lot of experience doing a lot of things. And you may want to just think about what are the 1 to 3 things that you most feel passionate about and joy about, and focus on those. Michelle,
Thank
do you have
you.
anything? Yeah, sure.
Well, I was just thinking, if you go to if you are in college, a lot of college students will work in their local affiliates. If you go to Mizzou, you could do that. Probably. Well, I don't know if you could do that at KOMU. Maybe.
You have to go to the J school.
Yeah, but you could work at any of the other affiliates, or I remember when I had my first job in Wilmington, North Carolina, the photographer I worked with, the photojournalist I worked with, was 19, and he worked on the weekends at the station, and he was so much. I mean, he knew so much more about the business than I did, and I was, a whopping 22, and he was 19 because he had been in the business since he was 18. So you can definitely do that on the weekends or at nights. Newsrooms are also looking for people who can just pick up sound sometimes. And there used to be apps. Do you remember, Doris? There used to be services that you could sign up for where you could see news happening, take a picture, and then try to send it on to a station. It was pitched one year at ONA, but I can't remember. I don't know if it's still a service that's available to people. But there are things like that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm actually going to drop in another link for you. It's the Talent Network, which is actually the Washington Post, but it is really regimented. So to even get into the Talent Network, there's like a month-long backlog. They treat it just like a job. It's not a job interview, but they would treat your application the same way they would anybody who's applying for a regular job. Like they do a full background check. And so what they'll find out is, this is unlikely to be an issue for you as a student, but they'll find out whether you've been giving a lot of money to political causes. And if that's the case, then they'll say, well, we can't have you writing on anything politically affiliated because we don't want our audience to say, is there some sort of potential partisanship that is not being disclosed here? But they might let you write a feature obit on somebody. Like there are lots of different things like that. But once you get into the Talent Network, that's a way that they can deploy to say there's some sort of breaking news happening in whatever city. And then they can check to say, oh, this is happening in Joplin. Zeke lives there. I don't know where you live, Zeke, but let's just say Joplin. Zeke lives there. Let's find out if they can go out and take care of this for us. And it would depend on like what your skills are. Is it photojournalism? Is it videography? Is it data journalism? So like, you know, obviously if you were a data journalist, they may or may not deploy you on some breaking news situation in the city that you're living in, but maybe.
I have another question that's kind of like adjacent to what I just asked. Do colleges have like college newspapers the way high schools do, or is it like a totally separate program?
It depends on the school. So Mizzou has a student newspaper, the Maneater, which is completely independent, even though I think they do still have space at the university. And then Mizzou also has the Columbia Missourian, which you can only work at as part of the journalism program. So you have to be in the journalism school to work at the Columbia Missourian, which is actually a requirement to graduate from the journalism school, depending on your concentration. But many schools have different kinds of media outlets. Like there might be a radio station, there might be some podcasts that are available to you. There might be student networks of TV kind of broadcast. So like Michelle mentioned KOMU, but KOMU at Mizzou is again part of the J School. But like I know MIT, which does not have a J School, does have a newspaper. And that's actually how one of our friends, Tom Wong, who's a top editor at the Dallas Morning News, got his start in journalism. He has a master's in engineering, but he just really loved journalism. And he found it because of MIT's newspaper.
I know that also, you're right, Doris, too. I forgot about radio stations. I was the news director at our radio station at the University of Kansas. It was KJHK. And we also had the University Daily Canton. And I don't think you had to be a journalism major to work at the paper. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just remember that there were a lot of people who did some stuff for the paper. And then when I was we had a television station, but it wasn't, and it does not compare to KOMU. You know, we did daily newscasts, but not like KOMU. But we also, I think those were for journalism students, though it seemed like you could be active if you were just taking a journalism class, maybe. So you wouldn't have to be very far in the program.
Thank you.
Sure. I mean, there's lots of great outlets. And I mean, especially, it's been a long time since Michelle and I've been in college, but there might be things that you could do through like Facebook Live, like various things like that. I bet that that's stuff that that you could use on your portfolio and your resume as well. What other questions do you have?
I have another question. I'm sorry, I have a lot of questions.
Yeah, Laura and Raven, feel free to chime in if you have questions.
Okay, so when you're applying to colleges, do you put like on your resume every story you've worked on? Or like, would you just put that I worked for this paper?
I think if you're applying to a college, you probably want to show your broad base of interests and skills. So if you want to highlight that you've worked on journalism for the past 3 or 4 years, maybe choose your top 3 stories. I mean, that's the same thing I would say in terms of applying for a job. You don't send somebody every single exhaustive thing that you've ever written. Like at this point, I don't even have any kind of collection of that for myself, and I wouldn't do that. So I would send them things that are either super recent so that it shows how timely it is, or something that is really thematically pointing to something that I'm proud of.
Thank you.
Sure, we've got a couple more minutes left. Other questions or thoughts? I mean, I think it's so great that you're involved in journalism at such a young age. I think that that's really the future. Michelle and I and people who are involved in journalism associations are always wondering, how do we get people involved and motivated even younger? Because like, we're not very good at covering what's happening in high school. It's been so long, I can't even remember what classes I took in high school. No more questions from Raven? Okay.
I'd be interested, since we've just got a minute, what are people interested in? Are they interested in, what platforms do they want to write for, and what do they want to do?
I think my dream job would probably to be a reporter for like Rolling Stones. Rolling Stone.
Yeah, so I think that's wonderful, and that's and then Raven's interested in crime. So, you know, like, do as much as you can to learn about those interest areas. So if you want to work for Rolling Stone, of course they do more than just cover music, but you want to look at the ways that they do cover the things that are featured in the magazine. Like you may remember, now I'm like, never mind. I don't remember enough of the details to use this as a case study, but you know, Rolling Stone is of course got a long and distinguished history. And so they do long form journalism. So it's something that you would need to spend months or maybe even years getting that information together. It's probably something where you would have a team working with you. So think about ways that you can show how you might work on a team. Like it might be that you have a team project that you can put in your portfolio, and you want to figure out like, how can you find out how people got those jobs? Like literally you could just cold email people whose bylines are in the magazine. They might not all respond to you, but the ones who do will be happy to tell you how they got there. Like that's another thing. You can always reach out to journalists and just say, how did you get that job? They might not always answer, but a lot of times we'll have time to answer.
Thank you.
Any closing words, Michelle?
Oh gosh, I think you just have to dream big for yourself, you know, and keep at it, and understand that journalism is the heart of democracy. And I just think you got to keep going, and just know that sometimes if you want to, wherever you want to be, just take steps to get there. It's not going to happen overnight for most of us. You might be really lucky and talented and it happens, but I think most of us have to go through you know, a certain journey, and just understanding that as well. But good luck to all of you. It was amazing that you're here, that you jumped in, and that you had questions. Great questions.
Yeah, you did have really great questions. Thanks for sticking with us for these 45 minutes. They went really fast for me. I don't know about you. And again, you know, continue to network, like keep in touch with these folks who are here today. I don't know if you all already know each other, but you've already got a little bit of a network going just through this association. Talk to your advisors, talk to other people at your schools, talk to people at colleges, and feel free to reach out to journalists whose work you admire. Oh, Raven, I'm sure you know people. Look at those crime cases that you're interested in trying to pursue. Find out who's doing great crime coverage. Reach out to them. Maybe watch Court TV. You know, so there's lots of great ways to reach out to people. You've got to work on that though, because journalists have to overcome what might be your natural shyness, because otherwise you're not going to be able to build those sources and get those stories. Yes, and Michelle's Michelle Lee TV on social, L-I, not double L. I'm Doris Truong on social, on basically all platforms. I'm Doris Truong. And Michelle, are you the same on across platforms? Same. All right. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, you all. And we hope to be seeing you out there as journalists soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doris.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Bye.
Bye.